Between 1640 and 1900, our world was turned completely on its head. I mean, in just 260 years, a series of revolutions in ideas, technology, and politics didn't just redraw the map. They completely rewove the very fabric of human life. So let's dive in and see how this incredible transformation happened. So you gotta ask, what was the spark, right? How did we get from a world of kings, peasants, and ancient empires to one of factories, nation-states, and global capitalism? That's the big question we're gonna unpack together in this explainer.
Okay, so for pretty much ever, life was all about the land. Your station in life, your power, it all came down to who owned the soil. That was the agrarian world, built on centuries of tradition. But then, this new thing comes along, an industrial civilization, and its power didn't come from the land, it came from factories, from capital. People started pouring into cities, and these wild, radical new ideas about liberty and individual rights began to catch fire.
Here's our roadmap for this incredible story. First, we'll look at the explosive ideas that set the stage. Then, we'll dive into the industrial engine that really powered all this change. After that, we'll watch as revolutions literally forged new nations, creating a totally new global order. And finally, we'll see how the rest of the world was forced to react to it all.
All right, first up, a world on the brink. Before a single factory was built, before a single barricade went up in the streets, the real revolution, it started in people's minds.
I mean, this was intellectual dynamite. You had these thinkers during the Enlightenment who started arguing that we should build society on reason, not just on what's always been done. John Locke comes along and says people have natural rights, life, liberty, property. Montesquieu argues for separating government powers so nobody becomes a tyrant. And then Rousseau drops this bombshell, popular sovereignty, the idea that power comes from the people. Think about it. This wasn't just some academic debate. This was a direct shot at the absolute power of kings and the authority of the church.
So where do these earth-shattering ideas first get a real-world test drive? England. The English Revolution was really the first major crack in the armor of absolute monarchy. It ended with Parliament gaining power over the king. And this didn't just create a new kind of government, it also created a stable legal system that protected property, laying the perfect groundwork for a capitalist economy to really take off.
Okay, so you've got these powerful new ideas about freedom. But ideas alone don't remake the world. You need an engine, a real physical engine of change. And for that, we head to Great Britain. So what was the Industrial Revolution? Well, it was exactly what the name implies. A complete and total overthrow of how we make things. Starting in Britain in the late 1700s, we're talking about a massive shift from making things by hand in little workshops to mass production in gigantic factories powered by incredible new machines.
And this whole thing was kicked into high gear by a couple of game-changing inventions. You've got the spinning jenny, which just revolutionized how fast you could make textiles, and then the steam engine. Wow. Suddenly you had a power source that wasn't tied to a river or the wind. You could build a factory literally anywhere. These two technologies together, they changed everything. And of course, when you change the economy that drastically, you change society itself. You get these two brand new social classes that didn't really exist before. On one hand, you've got the bourgeoisie. These are your factory owners, the big shot bankers, the new money elite. And on the other, you have the proletariat. This is the massive, growing class of city workers who had nothing to sell but their own labor, often in just awful conditions. Society was basically split in a completely new way.
Okay, let's put the pieces together. You've got these radical new ideas about liberty floating around. You've got these new, powerful social classes clashing. The whole thing is a powder keg, right? Well, in Section 3, we're going to see it explode.
And you can see it happen like dominoes falling. First, England's revolution provides the blueprint. Then the American Revolution takes those Enlightenment ideas and says, hey, we can actually build a country with this stuff. No king required. But the one that sent shockwaves across the entire planet, that was France in 1789.
And if you want one image to sum up the French Revolution, this is it, the Bastille. It wasn't just a prison, it was a symbol of the king's absolute, terrifying power. So when the people of Paris stormed it, man, that was it. The message was loud and clear. The old world is done. This was the point of no return. And the revolution didn't just tear down walls. It gave us a new language for freedom. Liberté, égalité, fraternité. Liberty, equality, fraternity. This wasn't just a slogan. It became the rallying cry for movements all over the world for the next 200 years.
Now, what happens next is, well, it's complicated and kind of ironic. Napoleon Bonaparte takes over, and he builds a massive empire. But here's the crazy part. As his armies march across Europe, they're actually spreading the ideas of the revolution. They're tearing down old feudal systems and installing modern legal codes. So it's an empire, yeah, but an empire that's spreading revolutionary change.
So Europe has basically been turned upside down and reinvented itself. The big question now is what happens when this new, supercharged Europe turns its attention to the rest of the world? That brings us to our fourth section, the new global order.
You know, for a long, long time, the major powers in the East and West were more or less on the same level, but not anymore. This period kicks off what historians call the Great Divergence. Powered by its industrial and military might, the West just surges ahead, creating this massive economic and power gap between it and everyone else.
And what does that gap lead to? Well, it leads straight to a new aggressive age of colonialism. India is a perfect case study. As the old Mughal Empire gets weaker, who steps in? Not just the British government, but a private company, the British East India Company, backed by the state, of course. From bases like this fort, they systematically took control, projecting power and draining the subcontinent of its wealth.
And over in China, the story is just as brutal, if not more so. The Chinese government tries to stop the British from flooding their country with opium. Britain's response? They declare war. The Opium Wars showed the whole world the new rules of the game. China was crushed, forced to sign these humiliating treaties, and it kicked off what they still call their century of humiliation.
So, that brings us to our final piece of the puzzle. The rest of the world sees what's happening. They see this new, dominant West. They can't just ignore it. They have to react. And how they did that is our last section.
And the changes weren't just happening on a global scale. Back in Europe, that powerful idea of the nation-state was still working its magic. People who spoke the same language and shared a culture wanted their own country. And boom, in the 1860s and 70s, you get two brand new heavyweights on the scene, a unified Germany and a unified Italy. The whole balance of power in Europe gets scrambled all over again.
Outside of Europe, everyone had a choice to make. How do we deal with this pressure? And they all tried different things. The Ottoman Empire tried to reform, but it was just too little, too late to stop its decline. China tried to sort of bolt Western technology onto its traditional culture, and that didn't really work either. But then there was Japan. Japan's Meiji Restoration was something else. It was a full-speed, top-down radical modernization. And the result? Absolutely stunning. By 1900, Japan goes from being a potential colony to being a colonial power itself.
And so there you have it. By the time 1900 rolls around, the world is unrecognizable from where we started. The foundations for our world, the interconnected, industrial, and deeply unequal world we know today, were all firmly in place.
Look, there's no denying this era brought incredible progress, new ideas of freedom, amazing innovation. But we also have to be honest. It was also an age built on exploitation, on colonialism, on immense violence. So the question I want to leave you with is this. As we live in the world that this era created, who ultimately paid the price for it all?